Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Okay, I think a deeper point to all this too is, okay, you mentioned earlier the feeling of unfairness that's going on in our culture and the racial conversations that are going on. I think that a lot of times, at least many times, what happens is the unrest continues, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, is when we refuse to listen to the other side, right? Like when we refuse to, like, here's who I am, this is what I'm doing, and we don't have that sense of empathy, no matter which side of the aisle you're on. I think that just continues to push to the sides.
Yes.
And I'm always having debates on both sides, like whether I'm always, I consider myself a conservative person, but I think I debate and argue with my family, which are, conservatives, much more than I do with a lot of times.
I find myself in the same camp.
Sure.
I come from, obviously, central Mississippi, heavy conservative, bleeding red and blue. I would consider myself conservative, but I find I disagree with my family on a lot of things. And have debates with them.
Do you guys not find that there's a big difference, not just in where in America you might live, but also a big difference between urban and rural? Because I feel like if you live in the country, almost no matter where you live in out in the country, I don't really care at this point which state you live in, but if you kind of live in the country, you have a harder time seeing the viewpoint from those that live in or near a city. And if you live in or near a city, sometimes you have a harder time understanding where the country folk come from.
Yes.
I kind of feel like that's a bigger differentiation in this country than which state you're from.
I think that is true, and I think that when both sides when they dig their heels in and say, "No, I'm right," boom, boom, they draw that hard line, and that just exacerbates the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think when we're unable to stop and say, you know what, maybe part of what I'm thinking is right and part of what I'm thinking is wrong. I think when we kind of have that, if we can come to the point where we have that attitude, I think more productive conversations are going to happen in our society.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with that. And I just think like that's where an understanding of your culture becomes very important. Because if you live in the country, you have a particular sort of realm of experiences and interactions that you don't have when you're in the city. When you're in the city, you don't have the country one.
And whether you hate it or not, that's why the Electoral College is so important. Because of that very reason. Now, I don't want to go into politics debate, but because of the differences of life, I mean, I've had both. I've lived in a big city like I do now, and I've lived out in the middle of nowhere. Life is just different.
Yeah, it is. And
It's very different.
And there's something about the human experience that we tend to look at what's around us in our personal experience and assume it's that way everywhere and for everyone, and it's just not.
100%.
And this is why it's so great to travel. Like Andrew McGarity was on here yesterday just making this point. He was making this point with traveling with kids that travel is learning. And I love that point. It's so concise and accurate.
Absolutely.
Travel is learning. Like when you travel internationally with your kids, they are learning. And you see that they do music differently in Africa. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And they dress differently in China. And sometimes the first reaction of like a kid or even an adult who's experiencing that is like, the reaction sounds crazy to say, but the reaction can be like, oh, that's a little weird. Like they're different. No, well, they're not necessarily different. They're different from you.
Yeah.
You know, you have a particular culture and way of music and everything.
You're different.
But to them, you're also different. Yeah. So like zooming out a little bit and understanding, okay, this is my experience and my thoughts and my beliefs, and they are that way. Maybe they're not even all wrong, but they are that way because that's my experience. Maybe that's not how it is for everyone else. Like that's where we need that understanding and actually to like think critically and understand and appreciate other cultures and ways of life and other human experiences.